If you take the first true leaves of a sweet honey melon plant and just crush them up in your hands.
Yeah, you'd completely expect it to smell like melon, right?
Exactly. I
Or-
mean, it's a melon plant, but you don't. You get hit with this really sharp, unmistakable scent of citrus. It's super bitter.
Which is just wild when you think about it.
Right. But that biological plot twist, it isn't an accident. It's actually this highly calculated survival mechanism, and it's happening like silently on windowsills and in garden beds all over the world right now.
Oh, absolutely.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are looking into the hidden, really profound transformations that plants undergo, specifically that shift from, a fragile infant seedling to a fully self-sufficient organism.
Yeah, and I think it totally changes how you view a simple garden because we tend to view plant growth as this slow, linear thing. You add water and the green stem just gets taller.
Right, you just assume it's stretching out.
Exactly. But what is actually happening on a structural and, well, a chemical level is a complete restructuring of the organism's identity. I mean, the plant is constantly discarding old survival strategies and deploying entirely new ones.
To guide us through this today, we're looking at a dispatch from a gardener named Ang. This was published on August 13th, 2026,
Mm.
and the title of this post alone is, it's worth noting, it's called Notes on Gardening, Part 985.
Part 985.
I know, I really want to linger on that number for a second. That is almost 1,000 documented observations. I mean, it just shows this really methodical, almost obsessive dedication to paying attention to the natural world.
It really does. That kind of longevity in observation is incredibly rare because, most people plant a seed and they really only pay attention again when there's fruit to harvest.
Guilty as charged, yeah.
Right. We all do it. But reaching part 985 means this gardener is documenting the micro adjustments. They are watching these invisible milestones that tell us exactly how a plant communicates its readiness to the world.
So our mission today is to take a look at a very dense, short observation Ang made about the honey melon, formerly known as Cucumis melo.
Yes, Cucumis melo.
And Ang gives us this really great front row seat to the visual, sensory, and structural shifts happening in those earliest days. But I mean, to understand where it ends up, we first have to look at what I like to call the starter pack.
The starter pack, I love that.
Right. In the note, Ang talks about watching these honey melon seedlings physically push through the dirt, displaying their very first seed leaves, the cotyledons.
The cotyledons, yeah.
And based on Ang's photo, these first leaves, they are smooth, they're oval, and they're noticeably really thick.
Which is super important. That thickness is actually the defining feature of a cotyledon. Because when you hold a dry seed in your hand, you're essentially holding a tightly packed, suspended biological pod.
Like a little time capsule.
Exactly. When that seed is placed in the heavy topsoil, I mean, it lacks a root system to pull nutrients, and it hasn't breached the surface to pull energy from the sun yet.
So it's totally on its own.
100%. It has to rely entirely on the internal energy reserves stored within those cotyledons to generate the hydraulic pressure needed to physically heave the soil out of the way.
Wow.
So they're thick because they are dense with stored fuel, mostly starches and lipids.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. I am picturing these thick, smooth, oval leaves acting as this kind of temporary biological scaffolding. They actually remind me of baby teeth.
Oh, baby teeth. That's a really good way to look at it.
Because they serve a very specific temporary purpose, right?
Yeah.
To get you through the most vulnerable stage of life.
Yeah.
But they just aren't built for the long haul.
Yeah, that analogy holds up really well. Because they are purely transitional structures. Once the seedling breaches the surface and those thick cotyledons, open up to the light.
Do they start photosynthesizing right away?
A little bit, yeah. They perform a tiny bit of preliminary photosynthesis, but their primary job is really to empty their stored fuel reserves right into the stem just to keep the plant pushing upward.
Which brings us to the visual shift that Ang documents next in the post. Because after the cotyledons do all their heavy lifting, the plant produces its first genuine foliage, the true leaves.
Right, the true leaves.
And they look completely alien compared to what came before. I mean, where the cotyledons were smooth and oval, these true leaves have highly textured serrated edges.
Very jagged, yeah.
Yeah. And Ang points out that these new serrated leaves aren't just growing out of the old ones. They actually emerge from an entirely different part of the plant, right? Called the apical bud.
The apical bud, yes.
So I have to ask, why wouldn't the plant just continue to grow bigger, smooth leaves? Why completely abandon the initial design for something so totally different coming from a totally new location?
Well, it's because the plant is crossing this critical developmental threshold. It essentially requires a totally new architectural blueprint.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so the apical bud, which is located at the very tip of the stem, it contains this cluster of undifferentiated cells. You can basically think of them like plant stem cells.
Oh, okay. Like a blank slate.
Exactly, a blank slate. They are capable of becoming a stem, a leaf, or eventually even a flower, just depending on the chemical signals the plant sends. So when true leaves begin emerging from this apical bud, it is basically a biological announcement that the plant has exhausted its initial stored energy.
So the starter pack is officially empty. It just has to fend for itself now.
Completely. The plant must now generate 100% of its own energy through active photosynthesis. So going back to your question about the design change,
Right, the smooth versus serrated.
the smooth, thick cotyledons were engineered for storage, right? And for physically pushing through dirt without tearing.
Mm.
But the serrated, really complex true leaves, those are engineered for atmospheric efficiency.
Atmospheric efficiency. What does that mean exactly?
Well, the jagged edges and the increased surface area actually create turbulence in the air passing over the leaf. And that turbulence helps the plant exchange gases, pulling in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen just much, much more efficiently.
Wow, so it is a complete changing of the guard. I mean, you look at a seedling on your kitchen counter, and you just see a green plant getting slightly taller.
Mm.
But you're actually witnessing the organism stepping completely out of infancy and adopting its mature, specialized identity.
Yeah, and the visual transformation is just the surface layer.
Mm-hmm.
The internal chemistry of the plant is completely altering in tandem, which actually leads to that sensory paradox Aang discovers next.
Okay, yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because, again, we're talking about honey melon.
Right.
If you buy a honey melon at the grocery store, you absolutely expect a sweet, juicy, mild flavor. It is the quintessential summer fruit. But Aang notes that these new serrated true leaves have these visible oil glands dotting their surface.
Little microscopic factories.
Yeah, and when you crush these leaves, those tiny glands release a super pungent, sharp citrus aroma. It is a complete sensory mismatch. How does a plant whose culinary identity is entirely tied to being a sweet, mild melon start its mature foliage phase smelling like a bitter lemon?
It's amazing, isn't it? You are seeing the strict division of labor within a single organism. Because we tend to mentally reduce a plant to its final edible product.
Right. The melon?
Exactly. But a leaf has a fundamentally different job description than a fruit, so it deploys an entirely different chemical makeup. Those visible oil glands are producing volatile compounds, primarily terpenes, which are responsible for that really sharp citrus scent.
Wait, okay. But producing complex volatile oils like terpenes,
Yeah.
that sounds like it requires a massive amount of metabolic energy, right?
Oh, a huge amount. It's very taxing.
So if this seedling has just exhausted its starter pack, and it's basically struggling just to establish itself, why waste precious resources on smelling like citrus? Why not just funnel all that energy into growing deeper roots or just bigger leaves?
It definitely seems like a poor allocation of resources at first glance, but it is actually a non-negotiable insurance policy, because at this exact moment, the seedling is at its absolute most vulnerable.
Because it used everything to make those first true leaves.
Yes, it gambled all its remaining energy on pushing those true leaves out. If a grazing insect, like a beetle or a caterpillar, comes along and consumes those tender new leaves, the plant dies instantly.
Oh, wow. It has no backup plan.
None. Zero backup reserves to grow another set. So the plant heavily taxes its own energy supply to synthesize those pungent, citrus-scented terpenes as a chemical defense mechanism.
So it's literally repelling them.
Exactly. The aroma is a broadcast signal to herbivores that basically says, I am bitter, I am toxic, and I will seriously disrupt your digestion.
That completely shifts the entire perspective. I mean, the sweet melon fruit that arrives months later, that's biologically designed to attract animals, right?
Right.
To encourage them to eat it and spread the seed.
Or that's the reproductive phase.
But the early leaves are engaging in straight-up chemical warfare to aggressively repel anything that even breathes on them.
Yeah, the organism prioritizes its survival strategies chronologically. Protection is the absolute priority in the early stages. Reproduction and attraction, well, those only matter if the plant survives long enough to bear fruit in the first place.
Which naturally leads into the edibility puzzle that Aang brings up in the notes. Because, encountering this really intense citrus aroma, Aang naturally starts looking into whether you can actually eat these true leaves.
Right, curiosity takes over.
Yeah. And while Aang hasn't personally taste tested them yet, the research cited in the note confirms that the true leaves of the honey melon are technically edible. But Aang highlights a massive caveat here. You cannot eat them raw. They must be cooked properly.
Which I think perfectly illustrates that tension between plant defenses and human consumption. I mean, foraging or even just eating unconventional plant parts often involves having to navigate these really aggressive protective chemical profiles.
So if you just go and eat them raw, you're basically swallowing the plant's active defense system.
You are. In a raw leaf, those volatile terpenes and defensive compounds are fully active. And furthermore, as true leaves mature, they develop these incredibly tough, fibrous cell walls.
To hold them up, I'm guessing.
Exactly. They're primarily made of cellulose to support their structure as they reach upward for sunlight. And the human digestive tract is, well, it's just not equipped to efficiently break down dense raw cellulose, nor is it particularly fond of processing concentrated defensive terpenes.
So eating it raw would be a bad idea.
It would likely result in an incredibly bitter taste and honestly severe stomach upset.
So cooking is essentially our technological workaround. We are hacking the plant's defense grid.
I love that phrasing, hacking the defense grid, because that is exactly the function of culinary heat.
Really?
Yeah. When you subject those leaves to boiling water or, say, a hot pan, the thermal energy physically bursts those tough cellulose walls. It collapses the structure of the leaf.
All making it easier to digest.
Right. And simultaneously, the heat volatilizes the defensive oils, meaning those bitter terpenes evaporate away into the air, or they break down into harmless, much less pungent compounds.
Wow.
The heat disarms the chemical warfare, which leaves the underlying vitamins and minerals completely accessible and safe for our bodies to absorb.
It is staggering to think that this complex chemistry, the biological warfare, and these major structural transitions are all happening in this delicate little green sprout just sitting on a windowsill.
It really makes you appreciate them more.
It does. Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most vital milestone outlined in Eng's dispatch. We've tracked the plant from the thick cotyledons to those serrated, citrus-scented true leaves. But Eng notes that these leaves are also serving as this vital communication tool for the gardener.
Yeah, they're basically the external dashboard for internal progress.
Right. Because Eng mentions that the current status of the gardening project is simply a waiting game. The goal is to wait for these honey melon seedlings to develop 4 or more true leaves.
4 is the magic number.
Yeah, that specific number, 4, is the threshold. According to Eng's research, possessing 4 or more true leaves is the exact indicator that the root system has firmly established itself in the soil. And only when that 4-leaf milestone is reached is it considered safe to transplant the seedling out of its starter environment and into its own individual pot.
Which touches on a deeply elegant principle in botany, the symmetry of growth.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the person actually tending to the plant? Because I'm thinking, if you are a gardener and you really want to know if the roots are established, my instinct would be to just gently brush the dirt aside, take a peek, and see if the roots look strong. I mean, why rely on counting leaves when you could just look at the root system itself?
Oh, because indulging that curiosity is highly likely to kill the plant.
Wait, really? Just by looking at them?
Yeah, because at this early developmental stage, a seedling's root system is not just, a few thick, sturdy strings like we picture. The actual work of absorbing water and nutrients is done by microscopic root hairs.
Oh, the tiny ones.
Yes. And these hairs are incredibly fragile. They bond really intimately with the microscopic pores of the surrounding soil particles. So if you disturb the soil to physically check on them, you sever thousands of those microscopic bonds instantly.
Oh, no.
And you also expose that highly sensitive tissue to the air, which can desiccate and destroy them in a matter of seconds.
Wow. So digging it up to check the roots is basically like tearing down the walls of a house just to see if the plumbing was installed correctly.
That's brilliant.
You are destroying the structural integrity of the very system you were trying to verify.
Exactly. It is a devastating trauma for the plant. It's known as transplant shock. When those microscopic connections are broken, the plant immediately loses its ability to draw up water, even if you place it right back in the dirt.
Which makes the 4-leaf rule so crucial, because you don't have to touch the soil at all. But I guess, how does counting the leaves guarantee what is happening in the dark?
To understand that guarantee, we really have to look at a process called transpiration, which is essentially the plant sweating out moisture into the air. Okay.
True leaves have these tiny pores called stomata, and when they open these pores to take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, they inevitably lose water vapor to the atmosphere. So to survive, the plant must maintain a continuous, completely unbroken column of water pulling up from the roots through the stem and out of the leaves.
So the leaves are constantly draining the plant's water supply.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Those 4 large serrated true leaves are losing a significant amount of moisture through transpiration every single day. They require a heavy, uninterrupted flow of water and nutrients just to stay rigid and upright.
I see where this is going.
Right. A weak, unestablished, or shallow root system physically cannot generate the hydraulic pull required to keep 4 true leaves alive and hydrated.
They mirror each other. The demand above ground completely dictates the supply below ground.
Exactly. It is simple physics and biology working together. If you observe 4 healthy, turgid true leaves thriving above the soil, you have absolute mathematical certainty that a robust, highly capable root mass exists below the soil to support them, without ever having to disturb a single grain of dirt. That is amazing.
It really is.
The plant is explicitly communicating its hidden readiness. It is literally displaying 4 leaves to tell the gardener, like, hey, my foundation is secure, I can handle the stress of the elements, and I am strong enough to survive the trauma of being uprooted and moved to a larger pot.
It completely removes all the guesswork, provided, the gardener has the patience to watch and listen to those biological signals.
Yeah.
Because we focus so heavily on the visible output, don't we? The foliage, the flowers, the eventual melon.
Of course, that's the reward.
But none of that visible success is sustainable without the hidden anchoring work happening in the soil.
The journey we've taken through this single, really short dispatch from Ang just highlights how much we miss when we glance at a garden. I mean, we started with the starter pack, those thick, smooth cotyledons packed with starchy fuel, physically heaving the plant into the light. And then we watched the apical bud act as this biological architect, completely redesigning the plant's structure to produce those serrated, highly efficient true leaves.
And then we uncovered the hidden chemical warfare, where precious energy is spent producing those bitter, citrus-scented terpenes just to deter predators.
Leading to the really fascinating reality that human cooking techniques basically evolved to literally bruise those cell walls and neutralize those toxins, allowing us to safely consume what the plant tried to protect.
Yep, hacking the grid.
Hacking the grid. And finally, we arrived at the elegance of the 4-leaf rule. That beautifully synchronized system where the rate of transpiration in the above-ground leaves acts as a flawless, undeniable guarantee of the invisible root stability below ground.
It really reframes the entire concept of gardening for me. You stop looking at a plant as a static object and you start seeing it as a dynamic organism that is constantly calculating its next move. Every change in shape, every shift in scent, it's a deliberate strategy for survival.
It is. And I think there is such a resonant takeaway for you as a listener, just navigating your own complex environments. Whether you are actually planting a garden or you're learning a difficult new skill, building a business, or starting a demanding new project, there is immense power in deep observation and patience.
Absolutely.
Because we live in a culture that pushes us to rush toward the harvest, right? To demand the final product immediately.
But growth doesn't respond to our impatience. You have to respect the biological and structural phases of development.
You have to recognize when you are operating on your initial starter energy, just trying to break the surface.
Yeah.
And more importantly, you have to wait for the external indicators that prove your foundational roots are strong enough to sustain a massive leap forward. Because if you force a massive transition before the foundation is ready, the whole structure collapses. Just like a seedling dying of transplant shock.
Exactly. You have to wait for your 4 true leaves.
Observation and patience are what bridge the gap between initial effort and long-term survival.
Very well said.
Thank you. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to explore on your own. It's directly inspired by Ang's meticulous notes. We just learned that the earliest true leaves of a sweet, mild honey melon harbor this completely unexpected defensive citrus aroma that requires thermal breakdown to be safely consumed.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, what other startling sensory profiles, hidden chemical defenses, and biological secrets are locked away in the early, often discarded foliage of the everyday fruits and vegetables sitting on your kitchen counter right now?
Oh, it definitely ensures you will never look at a melon, or really a seedling of any kind, the same way again.
Definitely not. Next time you slice into a piece of sweet summer fruit, just take a moment to imagine the sharp, bitter, citrus-scented armor it had to wear when it was just a tiny organism fighting for its right to survive in the dirt.